Since ancient times, there have been efforts to control human populations via reproduction, retaining some traits or phenotypes and removing others. In 1833, British scientist Sir Francis Galton formally named this practice eugenics, deriving the term from the Greek word eugenes, which could be translated to be well born. In 1859, Charles Darwin released his 502-page-long theory of natural selection in his book, The Origin of the Species. Commonly, when people think of natural selection, a popular phrase comes to mind: survival of the fittest. Charles Darwin's scientific theories on natural selection and survival of the fittest were eagerly adopted by racial theorists and devout supporters of the eugenics movement. However, Darwin's true theory was complex. His research, now commonly accepted, theorized that environments were the main factor that deemed whether a trait was beneficial to an organism. However, eugenicists simplified Darwinism. They took the reliable facts within his research and manipulated the meaning to support the eugenics movement and ideas that there was an inherent racial hierarchy within the human race. Members of the eugenics movement used Darwin to support their cause, however changed a key aspect in his writing. Eugenicists moved away from environmentalism to placing emphasis on heredity. They started arguing that environments were not a huge factor in organism success. At the very core of the eugenics movement, people believed that people were born with either positive or negative traits. Therefore, their ability to thrive and succeed in society is predetermined. The Francis Galton Laboratory for National Eugenics, founded in 1904 in London, was created to investigate this relationship of inheritance to environment, or as Galton put it, the relationship between nature and nurture. Carl Perlson, the first Galton professor of eugenics from 1911 to 1933, spent these 22 years conducting research that proved, quote, environmental factors do not have 1/6 part of intensity of the hereditary influence of a single parent. The qualities the university deemed superiority based on were physical prowess, intelligence, work ethic, and character. Physical prowess was put first because it was the only factor that could be decisively proven. In other words, the other factors were impossible to quantify. In reality, the university was more concerned with justifying the superiority of the British race than anything else. Using this highly questionable science, eugenicists in their findings targeted immigrants, people of color, and people with disabilities, deeming them unfit for reproduction. Meanwhile, the ideal standard reflected the movement's members and the eugenicists conducting these experiments: white Europeans of Nordic or Anglo-Saxon descent. Eugenics was not just popular in Europe. It can also be easily identified within late 19th and early 20th century American literature and legislation. The prejudices eugenics pushed can be identified in popularly accepted pieces of literature at the time, like the Dillingham Commissions or the 1911 Dictionary of Races and People, a popular report sent to Congress relying on eugenics to convince Congress about the existence of a naturally occurring racial hierarchy and the inferiority of immigrants coming into America. This report influenced Congress to eventually pass the 1924 Johnson-Reed Act, a piece of legislation that greatly halted major immigration, allowing only 2% of a nationality's population in accordance to the 1890 U.S. Census to enter the United States per year. It also expanded the barred Asiatic zone to all of Asia, except the Philippines and Japan. People from the Asiatic zone were completely prohibited from legally immigrating to the United States. The measures nations took to improve racial hygiene were taken to their most horrific extent in Nazi Germany. The Nazi eugenics campaign systematically killed millions of Jews, as well as individuals from other groups like Roma, gay men, and people with disabilities. Outside extreme brutality, Nazi eugenics policy was reminiscent of many countries' legislation in all different parts of the world. Throughout the mid-20th century, other countries like Sweden, Canada, and Japan enacted eugenics policies that forcibly sterilized thousands of people. Within the United States, forced sterilization was common from 1907 to 1979. Forcibly stripping over 60,000 people from their right to reproduce. 64%, or 32 out of the 50 states, mandated sterilization for men and women deemed mentally defective. After World War II, the eugenics movement and their beliefs gained stigma and fell out of favor with world powers. By the late 1960s, research into human genetics started to become regulated by bioethics legislation to defend humanity from former immoral studies fueled by the eugenics movement. However, despite all this, applications of eugenics continue to persist in 2023. Eugenics is the practice of controlling human reproduction and choosing to retain certain traits in a human's genome. Following this definition, wouldn't sperm donation be an application of eugenics? Commonly, when individuals seek out a sperm donor for artificial insemination, they go to a sperm bank. Within these banks, people are able to choose their donor and what qualities they're looking for. These qualities can be anything from a donor's physical traits like eye color, height, race, to things like their sexuality, predisposition to disease, and even their level of education indicated by the institution they attended. Through having the ability to choose a specific donor, people gain the access to the ability to improve the likelihood that their child has a specific trait or phenotype. This common occurrence presents an interesting ethical question. Eugenics has a horrifying history and an infinite number of potentially negative applications. However, not all applications of eugenics are harmful. Donor insemination is estimated to be as high as 60 and 80%, an important factor that could greatly increase the chances a less fertile person has to have a child. Sperm donation also provides same-sex couples the opportunity to have a child without needing to have traditional vaginal intercourse, something that poses the risk of being unenjoyable. Third, the genetic screening done to donors with sperm banks could prevent the likelihood a child has to obtain hereditary diseases in the future. Therefore, after taking all this into account, should society's fear of eugenics past outweigh the well-being of future generations, prospective parents, and privatized sperm banks looking to make a profit? Ultimately, we know sperm donation exists in our society, but this is important because it reflects that society is not inherently against all applications of eugenics. So now let's look to the future. With new advancements in technology with genetic testing and clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats, also known as CRISPR in the Cas9 protein, human beings have unprecedented access to shape future generations. There are many different applications genetic testing provides to human beings. Some people interested in genetic testing want to use it because they value human health, both of their unborn child and potentially the whole human population. Genetic testing could be used to identify abnormalities in a fetus's genome. If abnormalities are detected, parents will know whether their child is at risk to develop certain diseases in their lifetime. Genetic testing does not inherently cause any ethical issues. However, it opens the door to ethical dilemmas once you consider how this information can be paired with CRISPR. Gene editing technology through CRISPR has ushered in an area of potential for the applications of eugenics. Nobel Prize-winning research from Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier revealed that through programming a guide RNA and pairing it with a Cas9 protein, it is possible to cut corresponding DNA sequences. In other words, technology has made eugenics, the practice of controlling what traits are passed down, more efficient and more possible than ever before. As of 2023, this technology is not perfected. However, as research continues, the technology is likely to become progressively safer and more effective. Right now in the United States, privatized therapeutic use of CRISPR in clinical trials is currently legal. However, editing on gamete cells, reproductive cells like sperm cells or egg cells, is illegal, as the changes will be passed down to future generations. In a future with CRISPR-Cas9 perfected in genetic testing, human beings would physically have the ability to handpick the traits of their offspring. However, a major ethical issue lies in how individuals would use CRISPR and what traits people would deem positive or negative to human society. People could argue that the heinous actions of countries like Nazi Germany and even the United States exemplify why humanity should never try to control the human genome. However, it can be argued that there are certain traits that are negative to human beings no matter what environment they are in, and that the possible technological innovations in this feasible future I'm proposing would allow humanity to circumvent the once necessary immoral actions that made eliminating these traits possible. For instance, governments like the US, instead of forcibly sterilizing people, could use CRISPR to eliminate hereditary mental illnesses like schizophrenia by targeting specific genetic sequences in an individual's germ cells or somatic cells. This would benefit both people living with the condition, as schizophrenia is heavily linked to instances of self-harm and suicide. One could argue that future generations would not be able to consent to these changes, and therefore it would make this practice immoral. However, guided by a utilitarian perspective, I would argue that subjecting someone to a life where they are predisposed to harming themselves is more damaging. Therefore, after weighing both arguments, it would be immoral not to use CRISPR. I think it is very important to separate the beliefs of the eugenics movement from the past and the people who support using technology to improve human welfare both now and in the future. Historically, the eugenics movement supported using race-based science to create inequality and create a racial hierarchy. However, that is not truly eugenics. Eugenics can be used to improve the life of every human being on the planet. From a perspective that values the common good, I believe not using science to get rid of diseases and mental illness that negatively impact all of humanity would be immoral. Following the perspective of somebody who values the common good of humanity, I would redefine eugenics to escape the rightfully negative connotations associated with the negative eugenics movement of the past. Through coming up with a new term for the group of people with this belief, I think people would take their argument more seriously and see the good it could possibly bring about. Assuming that CRISPR technology becomes more safe and effective, do you think legislation should change and CRISPR should be permitted to be used on gamete cells? Why or why not? Let me know what you think in the comments.